Today we complete our season preview for the last team in the Metropolitan Division, the Carolina Hurricanes. What should we expect from them this season? Will they be able to go deeper into playoffs? Are they a stronger team? We'll discuss all the changes and what to expect coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're completing the season preview for the 22-23 NHL season for the Carolina Hurricanes. Of course, they've seen some significant change this year. Obviously, they've been a pretty strong team the last number of years, have had good playoff success, and we're going to take a look today to what to expect this year, and can they get over that hump and go a little deeper into the playoffs and compete for a Stanley Cup. Of course, if you're new to this series, we're going to quickly do here is recap last year, take a look at some key team statistics, break things down a little bit, analyze how things ended, take a look at how the team has changed, key additions, key subtractions, do they have any prospects in the system that are going to have an impact this year, what kind of projected lineup are we looking at to start the season, and then take a look at some top questions facing this team to see what we expect as the regular season gets underway. Now, first, let's recap last year. They were one of the top teams in the NHL during the regular season, finishing first in the Metro Division with a record of 54-20-8 for 116 points. Certainly a fantastic season, scoring 278 goals for 9th best in the league. They had the absolute best goals against across the league, 202. That's a phenomenal result. The power play was really strong at 22%, and the penalty kill was the tops in the NHL as well at 88%. Ideally, you want your PP and your PK to add up to at least 100%. They get 110. That is a phenomenal record, having the best PK, the best goals against. That's a real stingy team that you're playing against, and clearly they're not just stingy, they're offensive too, being a top 10 scoring team in the league and a power play well over 20%. So that's certainly a really good result here for the Carolina Hurricanes. We know recently, the last number of years, they've been a playoff contender. We've been in the mix, not only making the playoffs, but making some deeper runs, going multiple rounds. Can this be the year that they maybe win the Eastern Conference? They were certainly in the mix the last number of years. They've come really close. Obviously, we want to see if they can get over that hump and get into at least the third round, if not the fourth round, to compete for Lord Stanley's Cup. We now have a head coach, of course, of Rod Brind'Amour, who's in his 5th year. He's been, at the beginning of Rod Brind'Amour's tenure in Carolina, of course, he took over from Bill Peters after he departed for the Calgary Flames. Rod Brind'Amour was an assistant coach with the Canes prior to that, and I think a lot of people were a little skeptical at first. Not that they, doubted some of his abilities per se, but when you don't really have any head coaching experience. Brind'Amour was a long-time NHL player, well-respected two-way player, real ferocious competitor. Had a lot of respect around the league. He's known for being a fitness freak, keeps himself in excellent shape, but he just didn't have any head coaching experience up to that point. He stepped into an assistant coaching role. Obviously was looked upon as doing well with that job, but you had to wonder, will this be his calling? Could it go either way, right? Like, you see top players all the time step into this role. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but he's been phenomenal as a Jack Adams Trophy winner under his belt now. He just is a real good motivator. Listening to some of his locker room speeches when they record them and put them out to the public are just phenomenal. I think he's a real player's coach, a great motivator, and he's done a fantastic job. So this team is very, very well coached. That is for sure. GM Don Waddell has now been in his role for 4 years. Of course, he's been with the team much longer. He was president of the Hurricanes since 2014. So he's been there for 8 seasons, but in the GM role for the past 4. Of course, that's after they let go Ron Francis. Don Waddell, who was already in the organization, stepped in and took over. So both of these guys essentially were in other roles and stepped in. And of course, that's what ownership decided to go. And it's worked out quite nicely for them. Now let's take a look at how this team has changed over the offseason. We've seen a fair bit of change with a team that's been successful, but they're trying to get over that hump. What do they need to do? Well, it was well documented and discussed by the coaching staff and analyzed by a lot of analysts. This team, what they were missing was a clutch top goal scorer. They needed another guy, especially like a scoring winger, for example, and they went out and got that, and they got him for nothing, and that's Max Pacioretty. Of course, the unfortunate part is that shortly after acquiring Pacioretty in an offseason workout, he was injured and is going to be out for an extended time, so he's likely going to miss at least half of the season, which is not going to be good. But you know what? Hopefully, if all goes well, he'll be back late in the season and be there at the most important time of the year for playoffs, which is really where they need him the most anyway. Of course, Pacioretty also came over from Vegas with Dylan Coughlin. Like I said, in a trade for future considerations, pure cap dump on Vegas' part. Carolina really with a bit of a theft here, in my opinion, getting some good players without having to give up any assets. That's just as good as getting, a UFA on your books that you don't have to pay for, basically, right? So essentially, they got some good players for nothing. Now, of course, they also made a big trade bringing in Brent Burns as well from the San Jose Sharks. That was a pretty significant deal. So they've added some real offensive abilities here, and they've also added some good veterans with a lot of experience. So I really like that acquisition of Brent Burns. Of course, he's going to be a big replacement on the blue line, which we'll discuss here on the subtraction side on who he's going to be taking over for, essentially. Paul Stastny comes over as a UFA. Well documented as well that Paul Stastny is pretty much best friends with Max Pacioretty, and he turned down reportedly more money from Vegas to go to Carolina. Now, of course, with that, Stastny's been to Vegas before. He knows what it's like to play there. Also knows what happened with Pacioretty. Pacioretty was also pretty vocal about how Vegas has been treating some of their players, and I don't think he was willing to go there in case they did him dirty too, right? So Stastny goes to Carolina and joins his buddy, who unfortunately now is hurt, but still, on a short-term deal, can be a real good player for the middle six. They also bring in Andre Kasha, who was let go by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Lane Peterson comes over from the San Jose Sharks. So that's some pretty good additions. They also have veteran defenseman Calvin DeHaan there on a PTO to see if he can grab a spot on the blue line. Now, who is no longer with the Hurricanes from last year's team? The most notable probably being Vinny Trocheck, who was there for a few years as a number 2 center. Got a more lucrative, longer-term deal in New York to play with the New York Rangers, so he's no longer there. That number 2 spot in the center role is definitely going to be a bit of a void, and we'll see how they go about replacing it. Certainly, a guy like Jesperi Kotkaniemi is expected over time to kind of fit into that and be the replacement. We'll see how things work out. Of course, they also moved on from Tony DeAngelo. They couldn't come to terms on a new deal. Traded him to the Flyers, and of course then subsequently got Brent Burns. So I think Brent Burns is going to give you the same results or better anyway. So to me, that's a bit of a wash, if not an improvement. Nino Niederreiter unfortunately leaves via free agency. Ian Cole moves on. Stephen Lawrence, of course, was part of that trade to the Sharks. Unfortunately, they were not able to retain Brendan Smith. He got a better deal in free agency to leave. Of course, Josh Levo, who was part of the organization but was mostly a minor leaguer, also departs after having a phenomenal season to get a more lucrative two-way deal to depart. And of course, Jake Gardiner, not expected to be on the roster. Of course, he did not end up he's going to be on LTIR. Apparently, his back issues, which we were told earlier in the summer were better, and he was going to be activated, and now the answer is the opposite. So Gardner will not be there and is likely going to ride up the rest of his contract on long-term injury reserve, and I would suspect there's a really good chance that Gardner's career is probably over. So those are some pretty significant changes overall. Do we have any prospects to add to that who could be essentially additions and help this team out? Well, the main prospect I see getting NHL time would be possibly a guy like Jack Drury. Drury is a player who I think will earn an opportunity to at least get some NHL games. And of course, young goaltender Peter Kochikov, who had a bit of a reluctant NHL experience at the end of last year after going through a lot of injuries, certainly came in and did a pretty good job once he was there. So I think he can be relied upon as being the number 3 guy in the organization. And should Anderson or Ronta get hurt, then I think they have a decent player there for call-up that they can certainly rely upon. So what does your projected lineup look like for Carolina going into opening night? Well, your top line very much is likely going to be Sebastian Aho with Seth Jarvis and Teuvo Teravainen. That's most likely what we're going to see. I would suspect they're going to give Kotkaniemi every opportunity to be the number 2 center. Like I said before, I do think that might be an area that they might need to look at later into the season, depending on how he does. I mean, he's shown glimpses of being a top 6 player, but he's also shown a lot of not. So we'll have to see where things go. Of course, he'll be flanked by Svechnikov and Marty Necas as the most likely combo you see for that top 6. The good news is bringing in a guy like Paul Stastny. He can also play center. You also have Jordan Staal. So you're not really losing out if you need to move a player up. If Kotkaniemi's not working out, You can put Stahl or Stastny in at number 2 spot. You still have the other one to play the number 3 center. Maybe move Kotkaniemi down to the 4th line. You can move some players around like that if need be and see where things go. But if Kotkaniemi can stay in the 2C role, you'll probably see a 3rd line of Jordan Stahl, Paul Stastny, and Jesper Fast. So that could be a pretty good shutdown line. And a 4th line very well could be Jordan Martinook and Andre Kasha, centered by young Jack Drury. I think Jack has a real shot at making the NHL roster here, but time will tell, of course, as they complete training camp. At least that's my take on that. They obviously a guy like Lane Peterson could be in the mix as well. And of course, Max Pacioretty, not on the projected lineup because he's going to be out for such a lengthy period of time. But you know what? Once we get later into the season and he can return, that's going to create a good problem for them and see where he fits within the top 6 on his return. On the back end, you're going to have a pretty deep blue line. Top pair, Brent Burns and Jacob Slavin. I think that'll be a pretty solid duo. Then you got Brady Shea likely to be paired up with Brett Pesce. Another solid run there. And then you got Dylan Coughlin and Ethan Bear likely to make up your 3rd pair with Jalen Chatfield probably being your number 7. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about Ethan Bear wanting a trade to get more of an opportunity, so we'll discuss that further as well. And of course, Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta make up your goaltending duo. Now, how is this team going to do? To me, this is a really good team. They have good depth in the forwards. They have good depth on the blue line. They have offense on both sides, good goaltending. To me, this is going to be another team from the Carolina Hurricanes that will challenge for first place in the Metro. They will probably be, I'm going to say, probably at least a top 5 team in the NHL and have a really good chance of possibly being the one of the teams that has a chance, I think, to come out of the East and battle for a Stanley Cup. Of course, no guarantees. They're going to have some stiff competition, but I do think they'll very, very much in the mix like last year and really have a shot in the playoffs to go deeper with this change that we've seen in the roster. I think they have the extra scoring prowess. Of course, a lot of that, though, will be based on Pacioretty and him coming back and being his normal self and scoring at the pace we've seen in the past. Obviously, this injury he's battling, with it being an Achilles injury, could very well be, is he going to be the same player when he comes back? That's a concern. If he struggles, well, it could be a bit of an issue. And of course, while we wait for that, of course, he could be placed in long-term injury reserve. They do have some cap flexibility there. We'll see how they handle things from that perspective as well. As I mentioned, Ethan Bear could be a trade piece. If they do that, I would suspect that Calvin DeHaan would get signed. That's a possibility because right now I don't have him on the opening roster because I'm not sure that he's going to get a contract, but I think the odds are pretty decent, to be honest. I mean, if they move Bear, they can go with DeHaan on that 3rd pair with Coughlin. And they still have Chatfield as well. So between Chatfield and DeHaan, they could play that number 6-7 role. That wouldn't be shocking to see. Like I said, the real concern here is Kotkaniemi at 2C. That's going to be the big thing to watch this year. And do they need to move up and elevate a guy like Stastny or Stahl? And I would think later into these seasons, we get closer to the trade deadline. If Kotkaniemi's not working out there, depending on how Stahl or Stastny does, that might be, if they have one good move in them that they can manage to squeeze in under the cap, which is going to be tricky, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe a number 2 center might be something they look to add later on and move everybody down a little bit, make them a deeper team and see where it goes. But I think it's going to be an excellent team. I put them in one of my probably top 5 teams who could challenge for a Stanley Cup. Let me know your thoughts on the Hurricanes' upcoming season down in the comments. We'll discuss further. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Of course, after this team now, we're moving to the Western Conference for the next one, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.